Iowa is not only 2-0, they are 2-0 the Iowa way. Welcome to Hawkeyes Live as we break it down. Week 2 of the college football season was prominent in the state of Iowa with the Cyclones taking down the Hawkeyes, and Iowa coming away with a rather convincing win over the Cyclones, a top 10 team coming into the showdown. We got Corey Brada on the line, as we always do, talking Hawkeye football. You can catch Corey on from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey, how you doing tonight?
Doing all right. Iowa fans can relax finally because the first 2 weeks that we kind of considered juggernauts for at least Iowa fans, what we're accustomed to weeks 1 and 2 are over, and hopefully these next 2 weeks are routine. So Iowa fans can kind of take a breather here before we get back into the Big Ten.
As usual, everyone, you ultimately produce the show. Leave your comments, your questions, your debate topics for Corey and myself. And again, let's make it a habit to get on over to Hawkeye of the Storm for Iowa football coverage. We've got our own Iowa Voice of College Football channel as well, so check it out and please subscribe there. So the defense, couple pick sixes, of course, against Michael Penix, another one last week. Bone-crushing tackles, great technique, tackling in space, gang tackling, technique in regards to made assignments, turning the ball over into scoring opportunities. It's just been a clinic of what Iowa does defensively, typically almost all the time, but to the nth degree this season through the first 2 weeks.
Absolutely. And this has been a kind of a conversation in my circle this week, just about, and we had somebody ask this during our post-game show with Don Patterson on Saturday, was this just a result of two kind of poor offenses? And in hindsight, you could make an argument that neither offense played well. Iowa State obviously turned the ball over a lot, as did Michael Penix. Michael Penix didn't look comfortable in the pocket week 1 against Iowa. I didn't get to watch him week 2. But, in hindsight, if you look back at the schedule from week 0, looking ahead, these were, at least for me, 2 of the more dangerous quarterbacks in the entire schedule. I don't know who you would place necessarily. Sean Clifford doesn't scare me. Graham Mertz doesn't scare me. At least at this point, he doesn't. The kid from Northwestern, the Clemson transfer, doesn't scare me at all. Maybe a Tagovailoa from Maryland is, I've kind of had that game pegged as a tricky game here in a couple of weeks. I've kind of had that pegged since before the season started. So maybe he gives Iowa some problems, the big play threat. But these are 2 of the best quarterbacks, at least on paper, in the entire schedule. So that's impressive. Now, the talk amongst Iowa fans this week is how sustainable is this type of turnover margin? And I don't know the answer to that question. I really don't. I think one big thing that people aren't talking about, because everybody wants to talk about how the offense is struggling, which it is, and we can have a discussion about that, Mark. But one big thing that people are forgetting about is the fact that weeks 1 and 2 last year, Spencer Petras threw picks, and he's not throwing picks right now. So as much as people want to say that Petras is struggling, and he is in many respects, he is not turning the ball over, and that is huge because obviously that negates turnovers from your defense. And right now Iowa's defense is playing at a level that I don't recall, at least in my, I don't want to say in my lifetime, because that kind of, maybe that's too encompassing, but certainly they're at a high level right now. I think most people in the Big Ten look at them as probably the best defense in the Big Ten as of right now, at least from what we've seen 2 weeks in. Ohio State certainly is not. So we'll see if it's sustainable. I know we had a lot of, and maybe we can address this briefly here, Mark. I got a lot of feedback during the post game and whatnot, even over on my channel, about our good friend Levi Stevenson and Iowa fans just ripping him after that loss. And I have no issue with Levi. Levi, had his thoughts on Iowa. And one of the big things that I said in my podcast, which will be released over it from the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube here in the next 12 hours, one of the big things I had made a note of was I thought Iowa had a clear advantage at the linebacking position. And that bared itself out. And Levi did not agree with that. But if you look at what Iowa did, I mean, of course, you're going up against maybe the best linebacker in the country, Mike Rose. I don't even remember personally, and again, I'm not a defensive guru or an expert on defense, but I don't remember hearing Mike Rose's name being mentioned more than once or twice on Saturday. But you look at what Jack Campbell did with the fumble recovery, return for a touchdown, scoop and score. The guy who forced that fumble was Justin Jacobs on defense, who looks really good right now. And I think he's kind of giving Iowa more flexibility than maybe they've had the past few seasons. All the fans love this cash position, which is really just a hybrid version of the nickel defense. But now Iowa can go back to its 4-3 when they need to and feel very confident in coverage with Justin. And he forces the fumble on maybe the best running back in the country in Breece Hall. And again, it was recovered by another linebacker in Campbell. And then Seth Benson had a pick yesterday or Saturday. So the linebacking core looks great. The secondary continues to look elite. I mean, you have Riley Moss getting 2 picks in the first week. You mentioned that, both going back for 6. Matt Hankins with 2 picks this week. And I said that going into the season. I know a lot of fans, Iowa fans that listen to my stuff, were kind of dogging on me for picking Iowa State. And that's true. I take ownership over that. But I also predicted heading into the season that Iowa's secondary would be elite, and that it is. And I'm not the only guy who said that, but it is certainly an elite secondary right now. They've got 2 guys who not only are skilled, I think I think it's safe to say with guys like this, you can count on them making an NFL roster at some point. They're for future NFL cornerbacks, and they're both experienced. I mean, Riley Moss has been in the program for, he's a senior. You've got Matt Hankins. He's a super senior. So this is a really, just stacked secondary. And then you got guys on the bench who I think people are comfortable with if they need to come in. And Terry Roberts, Jamari Harris, Sebastian Castro, have heard great things about him. And the other thing is, too, Mark, the defensive line, I thought, really took a step forward this week. Week 1, they were okay. They got pressure on Penix at times, but they're a young, developing crew. And I was really impressed. They were in the backfield all day on Purdy. Joe Evans looks really good. He's a guy that people kind of thought him as more of a hybrid pass rusher, and I think he still is that. But man, the guy's got an insane motor, and you put him on the opposite side of a line that already has Zach Van Valkenburg, and here's a couple guys that just have insane motors. So those 2 guys have really impressed me. I've been impressed with Noah Shannon on the interior, and then they're kind of siphoning in, Logan Lee, Y.A. Black, Deontay Craig has gotten some snaps. They've just got a lot of depth. I think they're playing well at all levels right now. And let's be honest, if people can insult the offense as much as they want, I don't know how much better the offense has to get for Iowa to, compete for a Big Ten title. Certainly, I think where they're at now, the defense is going to keep them in games enough to where they're going to be certainly there, I think, towards the end, at least for a chance at the West title. Again, Ohio State or Penn State, whoever they're playing in the title game, would be a different story. But anyways, the point is the defense is playing at an extremely high level. You just hope that the offense can take a step forward to where they can complement the defense, because right now they really aren't.
Iowa defeats Iowa State 27-17. A late score by the Cyclones closed the gap a bit. It was really and I don't like to use the word unless it truly applies, dominant, but I will say they certainly outplayed the Cyclones in every phase of the game, and from pretty much the beginning of the game all the way through until garbage time late. And so Iowa gets through this 2-game stretch that we've talked about for the entire off season, that it was going to be Indiana at home, the kind of chic pick, underdog, dark horse pick in the Big Ten Eastern Division. And that was obviously a game that, based on the big Tyler Goodson run early, the defensive scores was a runaway very quickly. And then Iowa State was a bit more of a slow grind, a field position game in the first half. Then Iowa put away the game again with the defensive turnovers and turning those into points. And so they've made it through these 2 games, and the season's not over. It's not like they're home free, but man, it 2 enormous hurdles to climb. I think collectively the most difficult 2 weeks in college football for any team to date. And that's one reason why I've got Iowa ranked at a particular place, and we'll get to that point here soon. But turning to the offense, we're going to find out at some point, but I think it's reasonable to think that it's not just ineffective offense. It's just not mundane offense, that they've been playing to the score. They've been playing to the opponent. They've been playing to the situation. They've been playing to their defense. And I truly believe, because I've seen this team play and based on the amount of personnel that's come back from last year's team, that I'm not touting them to be an explosive top 10 offense in the country. But I do think that they've played to the scoreboard, the situation, the opponent, and if they need more points, that they're capable of putting more points on the board.
I sure hope you're right because, I'll be honest. I try to be very, when I come on and talk to you and when I'm on my channel, Mark, I try to be very logical and unbiased, but I'm a different person during a game. And I've been very vocal during these past 2 weeks about the fact that Iowa really, you've got the reigning first team All Big Ten running back, and they can't run the ball right now. I mean, it is a concern. I don't want to just sit on here and harp this to all the fans. And, there is going to be improvement. We know that because you've got an offensive line coach as your head coach in Kirk Ferentz. They will improve. The offensive line is young. The good news is this week, and maybe you missed this, Mark, maybe some of our followers who are following us as we live broadcasted outside of Jack Trice on Saturday caught it, but we ran into a tailgate that featured the girlfriends of two of Iowa's offensive linemen, Cody Ince and Kyler Schott. Of course, Cody Ince starting at the guard position, and then Kyler Schott should be at the other guard position, but he's been injured. Now, according to Kyler's girlfriend, he will be back this week, and Kirk Ferentz basically insinuated that on Tuesday as well. So that's a really good development. He's been the one major injury. Iowa, that's the other thing we haven't talked about, is they have been healthier than I can remember at 2 weeks in. Usually it just seems like Iowa deals with a bunch of injuries in fall camp. You hope they can scramble to get healthy by week 1. Last year, you lose Seth Benson and Jack Campbell before the season even starts, and you end up dropping those first 2 games. I think there's certainly no coincidence there. Or excuse me, I think it's there's no coincidence there. That's certainly a big indicator of what happened in those 2 games against Northwestern and Purdue. So getting Kyler back, they're going to be almost completely healthy. I mean, obviously, there's always a chance of injuries during practice this week and, of course, during these next 2 games. But that's been a huge development. So we'll see. I mean, you've got, again, Tyler Linderbaum anchors the middle. You've got Cody Ince on one side. You've got Kyler Schott on the other. Can these tackles develop? That might be, I don't want to just simplify this because there's much more to it. Obviously, quarterback play is more than just your offensive line. But if these offensive tackles can improve to a point where you're not worrying about pass pro breaking down on third. I mean, Petras took 3 sacks at terrible times in that game on Saturday in fringe field goal range. And thankfully, Caleb Shudak made a 50-yarder to kind of bail him out one of the times, but the other 2, they came up empty. Those are sacks Petras cannot take. That's just completely ridiculous. Now, you also have to look at it and say, look, our line didn't block well, so you shouldn't have to be in that position if you're Spencer. So it's the chicken or the egg there, I guess, but we'll see how much Kyler Schott coming back makes a difference. Certainly with the running game, I think it'll make a huge difference. And if they can get the play action going, that's what Iowa is. I mean, Iowa fans would love to think that Iowa can use the pass to open up the run, but that's not what happens at Iowa. That's just not how Kirk Ferentz operates. They need the running game to help open up the pass. And, the difference between last year and this year on offense for Iowa did score a lot of points last year. They were running the ball down everyone's throats. Now, they did lose, Alaric Jackson, he's gone. Mark Kallenberger, he's gone. Coy Cronk, they lost a number of guys. I thought they'd be okay, and I still think they will be, especially with Kyler back. But I think if you can get the offensive line humming, you can get Tyler Goodson going, and maybe you throw a more of a bruising back like a Gavin Williams in at running back to help kind of stem things. I don't know. But if they can do that, that'll help Spencer to settle down. There was one drive, I don't know if you caught it, Mark, but in that second quarter on Saturday, and I had mentioned to some of my friends who were watching the game, I said, boy, something just clicked for Spencer. And it did. I mean, you watch the game, you could just tell his body language throughout the drive, during plays, before plays, whatnot. He was feeling, and then he put a beautiful pass on the money to Charlie Jones. And so that's a play where, you could tell he had really settled down. And, we'll see. I think if you can sustain some level of offensive line play from the guys you do have, including your tackles, that should help all around. Again, running the football, passing the football. They've got to get Tyrone Tracy more touches He's a guy who wanted to be the best wide receiver in the conference. He's hardly getting the ball right now. They've got to get him the ball. There's just no excuse for not getting him touches, even if it's on a reverse, handoff, whatever it is. Get Tyrone Tracy the ball. I don't quite get that from a play calling standpoint, but hopefully these next 2 weeks are really used by Brian and this offense to fine tune these things. And again, these guys on the offensive line, all they need, at least from my viewpoint, is reps, and they'll get reps these next 2 weeks. You hope they stay healthy, but they will get reps. So hopefully by the time we hit Maryland, and certainly the not saying Maryland's, all these games are important, but if you talk about the big games left on the schedule, it really will come down, most likely, as it always does, to probably Wisconsin. I mean, that would be, I don't know who else you look at in the West right now. I mean, Purdue, I mean, they haven't played a Big Ten game, right? But I mean, Mark, do you have any faith in anybody besides Iowa and Wisconsin right now in the West, with Minnesota without Ibrahim?
Yeah, that was my original decision for the Western Division, was Iowa, Wisconsin. And yeah, without Mo Ibrahim at Minnesota, that downgrades whatever chances they had, which I did not think were substantial to begin with. And everybody else, Purdue has played better. They played capably. Who knows how you can evaluate a performance against UConn last week, 49-0, but they beat Oregon State that first week. Huge test, of course, going to South Bend to take on Notre Dame this week. But Purdue would be a pretty major surprise to just about anybody that they would contend in the West. But so it looks to be a 2-game race and a 1-game scenario there at Camp Randall Stadium.
Yeah, I don't want to change the subject, but UConn might be the worst team in the FBS right now. I mean, yes. And keep in mind, Don Patterson, that was his last job. He was an assistant coach at UConn, and he's almost embarrassed to talk about UConn. They are a disaster. So I don't think you can read into that. Now the Oregon State win, that's a Power 5 win, so you got to give Brom credit there. And David Bell scares the living heck out of me. Iowa fans have had their fair share of David Bell plays. So yeah, I mean, you don't look past anybody. I'm not trying to say that we need to look ahead to the Wisconsin game already, but they have time. My point is, I think they can get by with average offensive line play until probably the Wisconsin game. And certainly you make the championship game, whoever you play, whether it's, Ohio State, Penn State, if Michigan shocks the world, they're going to have better offensive line play at that point.
But the Maryland game certainly in the preseason was a good game to peg as an under the radar possible slip up. And they've done nothing but kind of fortify that possibility. Talia Tagovailoa has a healthy arm. Dante Demas, Raheem Jarrett, two of the best wide receivers in the Big Ten. They're certainly not going to put much of a defense out there, a fast defense, but they haven't put it together. They've recruited pretty well on both sides of the ball, defense included. But they can air it out, and those are contrasting styles, of course, that are going to get together here in a few weeks.
I remember 2000, I believe it was 14. Now, 14 had some issues. If you're an Iowa fan, you remember the Tax Slayer Bowl where you got absolutely just destroyed by Tennessee. It was the game where Jonathan Parker threw the ball back in bounds as he was falling out of bounds on a kickoff. I mean, and that kind of started, but that did kind of start. That bowl game kind of changed the tune for Iowa football, because if you look back, like since the 2009 season, which ended in an Orange Bowl victory, things were not great from 2010 to 14. I mean, they were winning. They had mostly winning seasons, with the exception being 2012. But I mean, 2010 was a huge disappointment. 11 was very unmemorable. I think they lost to Oklahoma in the Insight Bowl that year. 12 obviously was terrible. 13, they lost to LSU in the Outback Bowl. I think that ended up being 8-5, so okay. And then trying to think, 2014 was the Tennessee game, and then 15 was obviously undefeated. So that changed when they brought Beathard in, and Rudock went on his way to Michigan. That kind of launched Iowa. But yeah, I remember in 2014 Iowa losing to Maryland, and it's contrasting styles, and it does scare me because that game was on the road. I don't know. I'd have to look back at the schedules, and maybe you kind of have that kind of memory, Mark, but I don't remember Iowa playing at Maryland since 2014. I know in 2015 they played Maryland at home. They probably have, and I'm just missing it. But it's just, and then you add in the fact that it's a Friday game. I don't love that. I don't know if that does anything. Iowa played well last year when they played on Friday nights, but yeah, that's going to be interesting. And the good news is you don't have a Wisconsin and Iowa State right before that game. You get Colorado State and Kent State. So if anything, you're going to slip up in one of those games, and hopefully that doesn't kill you. So, yeah, I had picked, if you saw my season predictions, I had Iowa losing to Iowa State, to Maryland, and Northwestern. At this point, obviously they got past Iowa State. At this point, I don't know how I could not pick Iowa over Northwestern. I hate to discredit Pat Fitzgerald, but I have no faith after what we saw, especially week 1 against Michigan State. The only loss that I see that I'm predicting at this point would be the Maryland game. Not that they couldn't lose to Penn State. Penn State looks better than I thought they would be, to be quite honest. And that could very well be I know they people is not much to brag about, but you could very well have certainly a top 10 matchup again in Kinnick Stadium the game after Maryland. So there is a possibility that I was looking ahead, but boy, the way Maryland's playing right now, you mentioned Tagovailoa, their big playability. You would think that with Phil Parker's bend don't break type of offense or defense that they should be able to negate that. And again, we're talking totally different eras, 14 to now, but that game does stand out in my mind as being a real disappointment. And if I recall, Iowa had a big lead in that game and gave it up. So, yeah, they can come back and Maryland can score points in bunches. Iowa should be able to push them around on the offensive line. Same with these next 2 games. I mean, Kent State and Colorado State. The one thing about Kent State, not to totally shift gears here, Mark, but the one thing about Kent State is they're not going to come into this game on Saturday intimidated by Kinnick Stadium. I mean, they already played Texas A&M, and I don't have their schedule in front of me, but they've got some tough games. I believe they play Maryland. Do you know that, Mark?
I don't know off the
I'd
top
have to look
of my
that up,
head.
but I think Kent State does get Maryland after Iowa. Anyways, the point is they're ready for this game, and Iowa has struggled at certain years. I mean, Central Michigan, there was the Western Michigan year. I believe it was Ball State. I was at that game, and Iowa found a way to win, but they've struggled. You never know, and even in years where Iowa's had a great defense and played really well, I think back to 2009. I mean, nearly losing to UNI, had to block 2 field goals to win that game. And that might have been the same year as the Arkansas State game where Iowa nearly lost. So you hope the players are zeroed in. I would think they are. But boy, coming off a high like they are, beating Iowa State on the road, and then of course you got Maryland in 2 weeks. I look back, and Kent State they were in that game against Texas A&M through 1 half. It was 10-3 at halftime, I believe. So, boy, if you lose to Kent State, we might not be doing a live next week, Mark. But yeah, these are opportunities for Iowa to fine tune things before that Maryland game.
Yeah, good call on Kent State's schedule. They go to College Park the week after, September 25th at Maryland.
Yeah, so I mean, they've got it, and they've already got the A&M game under their belts. I really don't know much about Kent State. I watched most of that game, just watched it back the other day. Texas A&M and Kent State. And Kent State, one thing about Kent State, they do lead the country in interceptions, which is ironic because Iowa's number 2 with 6 interceptions. Kent State's number 1 with 8. So, I kind of, as I watch them, it kind of looked like an all or nothing defense. They're either going to pick you off or they're going to give up scores. I mean, they gave up 31 points in the second half to Texas A&M. Again, Petrus has played clean. I don't anticipate that being a problem. But it is noteworthy. I mean, I know they played VMI, but half of those interceptions were against Texas A&M. So there's that.
So Hawkeye 2017, appreciate you being here in the chat. Yes, I am aware that I said that there was a pick 6 in the second week of the season. And of course, that was a scoop and score. Yes, I do understand that. I was watching the game.
Mark, I was thought, I'm going to correct him. And then I thought, no, nobody will notice. But of course, there's somebody's got to notice. Hey, it's a good catch. Good catch by him. Man.
I don't mind people correcting my mistakes. They should. I will admittedly say when I sit here and talk for 5, 6, 7 hours a day, I will say some things that that I know better. to say, like, I got hammered a couple of days ago because I misidentified Florida's second opponent as not being FAU but FIU, even though I knew who they had played. It just came out of my mouth that way. And yeah, I suddenly don't know what I'm talking about because I misidentified one of the Florida directional type schools.
Yeah, like I said to you earlier, Mark, before we got on the air, you know you're doing something right when people start ripping you. You know, I'm finally getting ripped. I'm finally getting ripped on my channel, Mark. So it's a it's a celebratory thing now.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's a good thing. It is a good thing all around. Well, we'll serve up this question, Corey. We've got Casey Mallory on the line. Does Kay Johnson get playing time? Kirk Ferentz says he's tearing it up in practice.
Well, I'm assuming he's talking about Keegan Johnson. He's got to be talking about Keegan. You know, he's playing. He is getting snaps. If you look out there, he is playing. You know, I don't know if he's going to get more playing time. I don't know how many snaps he's gotten these first 2 weeks. Arlen Bruce has also gotten some snaps. I haven't heard Kirk Ferentz. You know, I don't know exactly what press conference Casey was talking about, but I haven't heard him make comments about that lately. You know, you always hear in the fall, you know, the media is just going to, and I don't consider myself part of the Iowa media, but they're just going to jump on any rumors or any young guys. The unknowns are always the biggest storylines in fall camp. So, you know, we heard a lot about Arlen Bruce and Keegan Johnson. But the reality is we haven't seen the ball, I don't think, thrown to either one of them yet this season. Certainly, he's right. Casey's right on in thinking that maybe they get more playing time these next 2 weeks. I mean, if you're going to do it now. But I'm just more concerned with getting the ball to Tyrone Tracy. I mean, he is your best wide receiver right now. But the fact that he hasn't gotten the ball as much as he should be is concerning. And the other thing you got to remember is Keegan Johnson's playing behind a pretty loaded group of receivers. I mean, with Tyrone Tracy, Charlie Jones, obviously Charlie looks great, not only with punt returns, but with kickoff returns right now. So he's clearly in your top three. And of course, Nico Regani's in your top three. So you got three guys in front of it, at least in front of Keegan right now. And again, Arlen Bruce is in competition for playing time. One guy that I had predicted, and I'll own this, back in spring that I thought would make a big jump this year was Max Cooper. He's been MIA, and I don't know if Max, you know, he's dealt with a lot of injuries his career. I do know he's, I believe, second on the depth chart behind Charlie for punt returns. Haven't really heard much about him either. The good news is, though, you're going to have plenty of depth at that position. So if Nico goes down, if Tracy goes down, yeah, I think Kirk, from what we've heard, he would be comfortable going to Keegan or Arlen or probably even Max to fill the gap there. But I would love to see it too, Casey. But I think the big thing, at least for Kent State, is we got to see Spencer Petras connect with his receivers more. Whether that be, I think it does. They don't have to be bombs, but just getting the ball to Tyrone Tracy more, getting the ball to Nico Regani more, I'll feel a lot better. And then you get another game to fine tune that against Colorado State. But either way, I mean, hopefully, if Iowa can develop a big lead in either one of these next two games, you get to not only see the backup receivers, but hopefully you get to see a backup quarterback and see what Alex Padilla or Deuce Hogan can do.
So we have some playoff conjecture. We also have here a reminder that you can get to scout to both Maryland and Illinois on the Big Ten Network Friday night. So a rare Friday night game in the Big Ten should be intriguing there. Somebody had commented that Penn State would be the better offense that would be coming to Iowa City this season.
Well, I don't know that I would agree with that. What is Penn State? I mean, who did Penn State play this week, Mark?
They played Ball State. They won 43-13, something like that.
But Penn State was not impressive offensively against Wisconsin.
No.
So I don't buy into that necessarily. I mean, maybe they will be better. I'm not a huge Sean Clifford fan. I don't know if you are, Mark. Obviously, he's in the Eastern Division. But no, I think Maryland right now, at least at quarterback and skill position talent that I'm aware of, would have the edge. I think Penn State's probably better in the trenches, and they probably have a better defense. I see this question from Casey about game day coming to Kinnick versus Penn State. My understanding, I guess it's possible. And again, Mark, you're a former ESPN guy. Maybe you can comment on this, but my understanding is Fox has rights to this game. I don't know how that works, but from what I've heard, that's probably going to be a big noon game, the Iowa Penn State game, and that game day doesn't normally do the big noon game, do they?
If it's overwhelming, that they have broken trend in recent years, but it has to be decidedly the best matchup of the week for them to make that kind of move. Yeah.
Yeah, but it'll be a great game. I hope it's not a big noon game because I prefer night games, and Iowa Penn State at night has kind of been a tradition.
Mm-hmm.
But the Big Ten slate that week, I'd have to look at the whatever that is, like week 6. I'd have to look at the schedule, but it's not loaded, I don't believe. So there's a good chance Fox will bite and have Iowa Penn State as the noon game. But yeah, both of those two games are going to be great. And I don't want to say you're playing with house money, but you can play. Certainly don't want them to lose to Maryland. I don't want to lose to either team, but if you're playing those two teams, Maryland and Penn State, who I think are two of the better teams in the East, you can kind of play with house money because it's not a double whammy losing to an Eastern opponent. Wisconsin's already got a loss to Penn State in the bag. Northwestern's got a loss to Michigan State. So we're saving. The more important games are later on in the year.
So maybe at some point, Corey, we're going to get you out of that Iowa mindset in terms of strategizing losses. Like, we may lose that one. I'd rather lose that one. That puts us in a tie-breaking position. We'll get you in that Ohio State mentality of you don't think you're ever going to lose. Why would we strategize losses or think about losing a game?
Well, I've never heard anybody say that we're going to end up with the Ohio State mentality. What's really makes me nervous. A couple things. I'll be negative Nancy here for a second. Here's what makes me nervous this week after the Penn State game. And you can call me again a Debbie Downer or whatever, negative Nancy. But a couple things. A, you got people like Mark Rogers putting Iowa as the number 1 team in the country. Now I get the criteria. I agree with you. They've got as a resume right now, they should be number 1. I hate hearing that, and I hate the AP poll ranking Iowa number 5. I'd be just fine with Iowa being unranked. Now, of course, they don't. I just don't like rankings at this point in the season. So, and do I think Iowa players are reading into it? Probably not. I don't like that. That's the first thing. Second thing is, you look at a team like Iowa. I hear people this week talking about, can Iowa, maybe this is Iowa's year to. Maybe this is the year where Ohio State isn't going to win the Big Ten, and look at Iowa. Okay, here's the problem with that. First of all, Ohio State's still Ohio State. We're through 2 weeks of the season, and as much as I just got done kind of downplaying some of the concerns about the offense, they're not beating Ohio State with the worst offense in the Power 5. That's just not happening. There is no way that happens. And if Hawkeye Howard, one of our loyal listeners who predicted 12-0, wants to come on here and call me a liar, I want them to, but it's not realistic to think they're going to be able to do that. Now, I do agree that part of the reason, and I think you had Steve Dace on yesterday, Mark, and he commented on this as well. Part of the reason why they're that far down as far as total offensive numbers is because of the competition, but it's not all because of the competition. They've got to figure this out. Again, I think they will, but I don't like people talking about that at this point in the season. Haven't won the West since 2015. Let's just get there first. Let's not worry about, making the playoff and beating Ohio State. And we got to just take care of business in front of us. And I sound like a coach, but let's just go beat Kent State and take one game at a time.
Hey, it's seen year to year. Pick your team that finishes with a glossy record, 10-2, 11-1. Yes, most of those losses are to the team that you would peg in the preseason, but there's a pretty large portion, whether it's 25, 30, 35%, something in that range of those games, those losses come to, and I'll use Ohio State as an example, Iowa 2017, not the team that you would have pegged Ohio State losing to, a good Iowa team, but an 8-5 Iowa team, I believe 8-5 that season with a bowl win against, was that Boston the Boston College Pinstripe Bowl?
The ice rink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ohio State lost the next year to a Purdue team that lost 7 games that they were clearly better than, but that was their one loss of the season. Oklahoma, the previous 2 years to last season and going back the last 2 years, losing its only game to Kansas State teams that were 8-5 and 4-6. as a one-loss team. So it's not always the games that you would think. And so there's a lot of different teams that could jump up and challenge Iowa.
Yeah, I see the real Hayden. I see a comment. Looking at the chat over here too. I've seen us trip up to Purdue and Northwestern too many times, and maybe that's a faulty way of predicting. As far as I know, you don't really do game by game predictions, Mark. But maybe that's a faulty way of me doing game by game predictions for Iowa, because I can see Iowa beating Penn State and Wisconsin, but absolutely I can see Iowa losing to a Northwestern again. Northwestern, again, as soon as I discredit them or count them out, they end up finding a way to beat Iowa. Purdue scares me still, because I think they're a little bit better than most people thought. I don't know how good, because again, they've only played Oregon State really. But yeah, I mean, you don't want to speculate on too much at this point, because there's so much season ahead of us. Iowa fans, though, it's okay to be excited, because it's not every day that you beat two ranked teams back to back, but B, you beat a top 10 team on the road, and you have these two ranked games weeks 1 and 2. I mean, it just never happens. Iowa rarely opens up with a Power 5 opponent, period. And the last time they did was last season, and they started 0-2. So it's okay to get excited. Maybe I don't want to be the guy that just keeps pumping the brakes, but yeah, there's just a lot of season ahead of Iowa. They've got the pieces on defense. We'll see if they can put it together on the other side.
And therefore, it is reasonable to make projections that teams will lose to lesser teams, because I typically get the backlash of those kind of comments that if I'm selecting a team to lose to another team, that I automatically think that the team that's going to win the game is the better team. Well, most of the time, yes, but the team that wins isn't necessarily always the better team.
Yeah, I had somebody comment and say, you predicted Iowa lose to Iowa State. What right do you have to be talking about Iowa? So now, because I got that prediction wrong, I have no right. I'm signing off for my life, Mark. I have no right to be talking about Iowa. So I guess reality is not everybody's friend. But anyways, moving on from the haters, Mark.
Yeah, because I had to point out to that individual that where I got the team wrong, that if that was their criteria for listening to podcasters, analysts, whatever you want to term us, that they wouldn't be listening to anybody long. Their listening options would dwindle to zero at some point.
Well, and Iowa has Gary Dolphin, who I know Gary personally, great guy. I think he's one person that we take for granted as far as having him as the play-by-play guy for Iowa. And when he's gone, it's going to be a sad day. But he does a podcast, and if you want a homer, I mean, he's a homer. I mean, that's what his job is. So you go over listen to Gary. But the thing about it is, if you're an Iowa fan, and I saw the real Hayden commented this as well, we've had one undefeated season in the past 100 years. This is, people keep saying, oh, I don't see another loss in the schedule. It's not realistic to make that prediction. Is it realistic for Ohio State? Well, obviously not this year, because they had already lost, but typically you can make that prediction for an Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson. But like you said, Mark, there are going to be games, because Iowa does not tout out or bring out 4- and 5-star guys at every position. There are going to be games where Iowa just has an off day, can't move the ball. I mean, they've already had that 2 games in a row. You wonder what would have happened these first 2 games had Iowa not, had Iowa's cornerbacks dropped those interceptions. I mean, I know that's a huge game of what if, but as far as the numbers, if you look at the numbers from Saturday, Iowa State outgained Iowa. They had a better average per play than Iowa. Turnovers decide that is the biggest indicator of wins and losses is turnover margin in college football. So if Iowa can continue to do that, they're going to win a lot of games. But I think that's, again, to go back to the big question is, can they sustain that? And I just don't know at this point.
Yeah, I would have to go through year to year and see the interception or the turnover leader in college football defensively and what that number typically is over the course of 12 games. I got to think that they're ahead of that pace. Therefore, most likely it's going to slow down to some extent. Now, let it slow down against Colorado State or whomever. But then again, you're more likely to get turnovers against the lesser teams, although they turned over two really good opponents these first 2 weeks of the season. And there is a luck factor to turnovers. I'm going to make an estimation that's not based on, it can't be statistically proven, but I think it's reasonable to think it has been proven to a certain extent that there is a luck factor with turnovers in football. I would think that that's maybe 20 to 30% of the equation. And the rest of it is if you hit hard, if you can catch the football in the secondary, to Corey's point, because a lot of defensive backs don't and have those kind of ball skills, then you're going to, we're talking about, I believe, a program that has, I don't know if this is the exact number. I saw a number this week over the last, it's a 20 to 25 year statistic about, I thought it was about turnovers, and I thought Ohio State was extremely high and Iowa was as well.
Well, that wouldn't
remember what that number was.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. And that's credit to Phil Parker. He's being a former defensive backs position coach. You just can count on Iowa turning teams over. I mean, year in and year out. The difference with, again, I go back to the difference with this team is my major complaint has been Iowa typically brings out a particular cornerback and he takes this side, the wide side of the field, and this guy's got the short side of the field. This year, it doesn't matter if you line up, and I think if in past years, Alan Lazard or Rondell Moore on the opposite side of the field, because you've got a cornerback who you would almost consider an equal to the other cornerback to be able to take that side. That's the big thing. I just don't remember a year where Iowa's had two really stellar corners. I mean, the Desmond King 2015, that was a solid secondary, but they also went undefeated. But that was Desmond King and Greg Maben, and Maben ended up playing a little bit in the NFL. I don't know if he's still on an active roster, but that was a good tandem. But most years you've got, a Josh Jackson and then whoever's across from him, or a Michael Ojemudia and whoever's across from him. Same even going back to Amari Spivey. I think Sean Prater was the opposite corner in a couple of those years, but he was okay. This is a unique year from that perspective, and we've seen the results. Lots of turnovers, and again, I think this linebacker core was just completely underrated. And boy, I got to give again shout out to the defensive line. That what they did on Saturday, again, not only getting in the backfield, but we saw Iowa get their hands on a lot of balls. And the second interception for Matt Hankins was a tipped pass. I believe the one to Benson was actually deflected off an Iowa State player. But it's just it's the fundamentals that Iowa's line is just going to always possess because of who their coordinator is. They're going to get up for balls. They're going to, if it comes their way, they're going to catch it. And so then when you add in the fact that there's not really a perceivable weakness on this defense, I think it's going to result in a lot of turnovers. So if I had to make a prediction, it's not, like you said, it's probably, there's just no way it's going to be able to sustain itself to where Iowa's, like Iowa State, beating them in turnover margin by 4 every game. But they're going to be able to continue to get, I would not be surprised to see Iowa lead the country, or at least lead Power 5 teams in turnovers by the end of the year. I mean, they've already got a huge head start. And again, it's been against 2, at least what we thought to be really solid quarterbacks.
What's not sustainable is to average 1.5 scores per game by the defense.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, here's one thing we haven't talked about as to why that's happened. At least on Saturday. Yes, Justin Jacobs forced that fumble. Yes, Jack Campbell scooped it, and he was only 5 yards out. But the reason they were that close was because of one man, and that's Tory Taylor. I mean, this guy is punting out of his mind. And again, we don't want to talk about punters. That the reality is Tory Taylor is on his way to being, I think, the best punter in the Kirk Ferentz era. Obviously, Reggie Roby is probably the best punter in Iowa history. So wouldn't put Tory on that level yet. But what Tory's been able to figure out, and Don Patterson and I have had these conversations, is he's figured out how to punt the traditional American style of punt, which is not always something that Australian punters can learn. Michael Sleep Dalton was a guy who had transferred to Iowa from Arizona State and was originally from Australia. He never was great at the traditional punt. He had a good punting average, but again, most of that came rugby style. And right now, Tory Taylor is punting like an American punter, and it's really impressive. I mean, the guy had, I think, he had like a 69-yard punt on Saturday. And if you look at the numbers, I don't have them in front of me, but you look at the starting field position average for each team, Iowa State was consistently, I mean, inside their own 15, I mean, throughout that entire game. And that's credit to Tory. I mean, Iowa's offense, even when they were struggling to move the ball, they were getting the ball, midfield or at their own 40, whereas Iowa State's starting at their own 10, their own 5, their own 20. That's it. That's huge. And so a play like that, where you force a turnover, yeah, that puts you in a position to score and capitalize right away. And so in a way, I think it, again, is it completely sustainable? No, but you have a great punter right now. You have a very good punt returner, which helps things as far as field position, and you have a stellar defense all around.
Some of your Ohio State comments spurred a few comments from the chat in response. This is an Iowa show, and we will keep it that way. I will just make one comment about Ohio State, just that I think it's going to be fascinating to see whether they correct their issues or if this will, in fact, be a down year for Ohio State. Understand that they had a historically bad defense in 2018, and they were still able to outscore it to the tune of going 13-1, number 3 in the country, winning the Big Ten championship in the Rose Bowl. And they lost a game, at one point, obviously tripped up during the season. So we will see if Ohio State is regressed to the pack because of just personnel issues and poor coaching in that game, I believe, against Oregon. I do have one quiz question of sorts for you to fill in the numbers in the blank. The last I saw this statistic, there were 25 stars on current rosters in the Big Ten. How many do you think Ohio State has out of the 20?
You said 25 in the Big Ten?
20.
Total?
20.
25 stars in all of the Big Ten.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State's probably got a handful. Michigan's probably got a couple, right? I would probably say at least half.
The stat that I saw, and I saw it verified a couple different places, 15 of 20.
Wow. So, that's the misnomer, in my opinion, and I'm no Ohio State expert, but when people say, they've got you just use the term historically bad defense. What is an historically bad defense? I mean, are we talking nationally? What is as far as average points against, what is an historically bad defense to you?
That 2018 defense, they gave up 51 to Maryland. That was the team that got hit for 49 against Purdue. That was their one loss, where they got just torched in West Lafayette in a night game, and they were number 2 in the country.
And they gave up 50 something to Iowa the year before, right?
Yeah, 55, right? 55-24.
Yeah, so that was not a good stretch for Ohio State. And maybe this is not a fair question. Maybe you don't like this question, Mark, but if you had to pick, if say Iowa and Iowa State played this Saturday, would you care to throw out a predictive score for that game as of right now?
I think those concerns on defense are real. I don't think it's just a matter of, okay, we've just got so much talent, we can pretty much do whatever we want. How much Iowa would be able to take advantage of that versus what Oregon did? I think that if they play at a neutral site, that Iowa, I would feel more confident about Iowa's performance. I would feel more sure of what Iowa was going to bring to that game versus Ohio State. And with a young starting quarterback who's making some mistakes for Ohio State, I would think it would be, I would have never said this 2 weeks ago, a bit of a toss-up game
Wow.
A very intriguing matchup, just because
Yeah.
Iowa playing as good a football as they are, and because the characteristics of the teams being so different. I think the Big Ten Network must have said it 800 times, because it just stuck in my brain that Iowa produced, what was it, 173 yards of total offense on Saturday, and Ohio State had 612. And who won the football game?
Yeah. As for some reason, as you were talking, I kind of thought back to basketball season. And I'm only going to bring this up because I know a lot of Iowa fans on here who are passionate about football are also passionate about basketball. The past several years, I mean, even looking back at the whatever year Iowa had the losing season, I think it was like 2018, whatever the case. Throughout the past 3 to 4 years, Iowa basketball has been consistently top 5 nationally in total offense. This past year, I mean, it was Gonzaga and Iowa most of the year. If you look at Ken Palm's ratings, they were basically number 1 and number 2 throughout the entire year. The problem was they couldn't play a lick of defense, and we kept saying this past season, as Iowa was a top 5 team preseason, we kept saying, how good does Iowa's defense need to be? Because their offense is just incredible, and they had times where they played okay defensively, but then you look at reality, and the reality is Iowa got to the tournament and got pretty much their pants pulled down against Oregon in the round of 32. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen to football, but you can't have, you would know the numbers better than me, Mark, but I don't, from what I know, you cannot, I don't care if it's football, basketball, you cannot have one side of the football that you are absolutely abysmal and expect the other side to be elite enough to make up for that. I just don't think that's how it works. And that's why I've said with Iowa basketball for several years, they don't have to be great. They just have to be decent. And they haven't been decent. They were decent at times last year, but they weren't decent consistently. This Iowa offense so far has not been decent. It's been poor. Again, competition plays into it. That's why I'm not trying to just sound the alarm. Competition plays into this. And they've got an opportunity these next 2 weeks to fix some things.
Corey, you've brought up 2015 a few times, and in response to many of the comments about Iowa going undefeated and just the probability that, that's a long shot. How would you compare? And if I remember that 2015 team correctly, they did benefit from a pretty light Big Ten Eastern Division schedule.
Yeah, let's see if I can. That would have been, was 15. 15 was still the 8-game schedule, correct?
Yeah,
8-game conference. Excuse me.
Yep.
So crossovers that year, if I can recall, in 15 was, I believe, Indiana and Maryland, because there were only 2 crossovers. Is that right?
I will find out here
with the 8-game schedule. It has to be, because I mean, the 6 other teams in the Big Ten West. Yeah, Indiana and Maryland were not. Neither one of those teams were setting the world on fire that year. So you're right. As far as I don't know if this is where you were going with that. If you want me to compare, or you kind of wanted me to compare these 2 teams?
Absolutely.
Well, the 2015 team was better offensively, at least to this point. They had a quarterback in CJ Beathard that could scramble. They don't have that in Spencer Petras. They had a quarterback in CJ Beathard who was very capable at getting the ball downfield. I thought went through his progressions well, usually made the right read on receivers, and didn't turn the ball over too much. I don't know how many turnovers he had in 2015. I think statistically he had a better year in 16, even though Iowa did not as a whole as far as the turnover numbers. But the defense is better this year. I'm trying to think. 15, that was obviously Josie Jewell was anchoring that linebacking core, so it was a good defense. That was Jewell and Bauer, Bo Bauer, and Ben Neiman. That was a good defense. Desmond King and Greg Maben were at the corner spots. Safety, I think, was that maybe BJ Lowry? I don't know. This is a better team. It's better defense, excuse me. The offense is going to have to catch up. But you're right. They benefited from a very pedestrian conference schedule. And, they were fortunate to beat Iowa State that year in Ames. That was a game where it felt like Iowa State was going to win. They were fortunate to beat Pittsburgh. I mean, they kicked a 57-yard field goal in the final seconds of that game to win that one. So they benefited from a favorable schedule. Iowa doesn't ever, like, when they have great seasons, and we're talking, 2000, 2002, 2004, 2015, and 2009, I would say, they have to win close games. So oftentimes it comes down to, okay, are you going to be 8-4, 9-3, or are you going to be, 10-2, 11-1? It comes down to, how do you perform in close games? We don't know how Iowa's going to play in close games because they haven't had a close game yet. I wouldn't want to bet on the offense to make a 2-minute drive down the field to win a game. I can tell you that. I'm certainly confident in Caleb Shudak at place kicker, but he had a bad snap from Austin Spiewak on Saturday at long snapper. That's kind of a rare thing to see at Iowa. Typically, I don't remember the last time Iowa's had a bad snap, and that cost him a field goal on Saturday. So, those are things that are valid to bring up. But we'll see. I mean, I think the close game comparison is going to be one that is still to be determined. The offense has to catch up. And the biggest thing with the offense, obviously, we're talking about the offensive line, I think will help Petrus, but quarterback play is the biggest thing there. I like Spencer a lot. I think he's a really nice kid. I think he's a mature kid. I want nothing more for him than to set the world on fire and start making plays like he made in the second quarter to Charlie Jones in that drive. That was a beautiful drive and a beautiful throw. And it felt good as an Iowa guy to watch it, because you root for this kid. You hear all the outside noise of people telling him that he needs to be benched, he sucks, and all this stuff that doesn't help anything. It's just, it just makes you look like a fool, in my opinion. And to see him make plays like he did in the second quarter was tremendous. So I want him to succeed. But if you had to ask me, who would I rather, CJ Beathard or Spencer Petras, I'd have to take Beathard at this point. I think it's a valid conversation. It's probably not a reasonable conversation, but it's valid to ask the question, if Iowa did have CJ Beathard this year, how good could this team be? I think sky would be the limit for this team, because, again, the defense is that good. The difference between two teams, as far as in something in favor of this team, is in 2015, there was no elite position. Linebacker, you could make an argument, was elite because of Josie, but this defensive unit, I think the entire unit is elite now. So that's I don't know. Again, I don't know how you compare those teams, but that's one thing that 2015 did not have. The schedule, I've said all along, is somewhat favorable, because you don't get Ohio State and you don't get Michigan, who's better. And I'm not surprised they're better. They're better than they were last year. Penn State's better as well, but it's sort of similar in that, again, you do get a favorable schedule. I think if Iowa were to go 12-0, it's a better resume than 2015, because the schedule is tougher. Again, I think the only ranked team, if I recall, that year, 2015, I think was Wisconsin, for the regular season. I don't know if you have that in front of you, Mark, but
I did a few minutes ago, and then I pulled it back. Wisconsin finished 10-3. That was a 10-6 win over Wisconsin, so that must have been it. Pitt was an 8-5 team. Minnesota was a close game at 40-35, but they finished at 6-7.
Nebraska wasn't anything. I don't know what Patty Fitz did that year. Oh, they were ranked. Northwestern was ranked.
Northwestern finished 10-3. Yes.
Right. That's right. And that was an impressive win for that 2015 team at Northwestern, because that was a highly hyped game, and I believe it was 40-10, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
So I'm not the only one you're not the only one who can recite scores here, Mark. Let me try to keep up with you. But no, that was an impressive win. So they did have a couple. But already, I mean, you could argue these first two wins, I think most people would say Indiana at home, number 17 in the country, and then preseason number 7 on the road, Iowa State. I would already put those two wins a notch above the Wisconsin Northwestern wins in 2015. So, we had this discussion, and I don't want to open this can of worms completely, Mark, but we had this discussion a week or two ago. I don't remember which live it was that we talked about this, but I had made the comment that I didn't think an 11-1 team, Iowa team, could would make the playoff. And I really don't know where to go with that conversation. But my question to you, as a college football savant as you are, what does an Iowa team that were to lose to Ohio State in the college football, or in the Big Ten championship, do you think, are you in a position, again, I know a lot can happen, but are you in a position to say that Iowa would make the playoff at, what would that make them? 12-1 with a championship loss? I mean, that's a valid conversation. If people want to talk about Iowa running the table, could you afford a loss to Ohio State and still make the playoff?
It's a valid conversation if these teams are being evaluated the way I would like to see them evaluated. And I know that part of that evaluation is based on the resume, but there's this large component there that is the eyeball test that is not going to work in Iowa's favor, at least not if they continue to win games as they have. For some reason, people are more impressed with 48-45 games than they are 17-14 games, even though if you're just taking an evaluation of the offense and the defense based on the score, then the same concerns that you should have for the 48-45 game can be applied to the 17-14 game, just on the other side of the ball. But for some reason, they don't seem to get applied that way. We've not seen a team lose a conference championship game during the playoff era and make the playoff.
How many undefeated? Do you know off the top of your head how many undefeated teams there were that lost their conference championship and then missed out on the playoff? Have there been any?
Wisconsin in 2017 was 13-0, lost to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game.
12-0 or 13-0?
I'm sorry, they finished 13-1. Yes, 12-0. That is the only one that comes to mind. I'm pretty good at this, that I'd be able to come up with the other team that lost as an undefeated team going into a conference championship game. It has not happened other than that one occurrence. Yes, in 2017.
Yeah, and
Iowa, of course, in 2015.
Oh, that's true. That's true. What are we talking about? Yeah, and what's weird about that is we knew. I mean, we Iowa fans knew when LJ Scott stretched that ball over the goal line. We knew it was over, and that's what's. I agree with you. Do I think Iowa was one of the 4 best teams in the country that year? Absolutely not. I don't. But we're talking about resume, which is what you base your poll on, and I believe that's what we should be basing everything on. We don't base things on, well, again, that's what the AP. That's why I don't like the fact we have preseason polls, and I think you would probably agree with that. There's no point to having a preseason poll because then they influence the rest of the season polls, which, I mean, it does nothing but waste people's time and waste people's energy. But, anyways, you're right. 2015, yeah, and if I recall, again, you're going to be able to tell me this, but there was something that happened in the Clemson North Carolina game that same night as the Iowa-Michigan State game in 2015. Wasn't there an offsides penalty on an onside kick that was not called? Had it been called, it would have changed the result of that game, and there was a good chance Iowa would have still gotten in. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Well, it would have given North Carolina the potential of defeating Clemson. So Clemson was an undefeated team regular season. They won that game. Here you go for scores, even outside the Big Ten, 45-37. So they won an 8-point game. That would have given North Carolina the ball with a chance to score a game-tying touchdown, 2-point conversions, and still having to play overtime. So it's a bit of a stretch. So it wouldn't have resulted in a win, but the opportunity to win the game.
So in your opinion, again, I know you don't agree with how the playoff committee and their criteria completely, but had the result of that ACC championship game changed, would Iowa have made it? Would they have made it with a 12-1 record and a loss to Michigan State?
I'd have to look at the rest of the field. You know who would have gotten a lot of play, who I do think was one of the 4 best teams in the country. I actually think they were the best team in the country, and I understand I'm biased, is Ohio State. They lost on the last play of the game to Michigan State as a huge favorite. They were consensus number 1 the entire season until 10-0, playing Michigan State, lost the game on a last-second field goal, 17-14. Of course, didn't, because of the tie, did not go to the Big Ten championship game. It's really, you talk about fortunate. Michigan State certainly earned the position. And I sat here, as I typically do now, trying to differentiate between who I think are better teams versus who earned it. And I simply said, I believe Ohio State's one of the 4 best teams in the country, but they did not earn a playoff spot. Should not have been selected for the playoff, even though, your NFL types are like, look at their roster, they should be in the playoff. They didn't earn it. Now, Michigan State was mighty fortunate that year. They had that game against Ohio State, which they, again, earned. But that was the same year, if you recall, the game Michigan State won at Michigan at the Big House, in which all Michigan had to do was secure the snap on a punt to win the game.
Sean McDonough. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I remember that.
And we're not even talking about being able to punt the ball. He didn't even need to punt the ball. He could have just fallen on the ball.
Right.
The game was over. There were double zeros.
And then all you
clock.
have to do is tackle him before he gets to the goal line, and nobody could tackle him before he gets to the goal line. And that was the Jake Rudock year.
Yeah. So the Michigan punter whirled around and threw the ball like up in the air over his head. Why? Yeah.
Oh, he has trouble. Yeah, I remember that. That is one of the. Now, I will say, I felt sorry for Michigan fans. I don't know if you feel sorry for Michigan fans ever, Mark, but some of the pictures, the ESPN shots from the crowd were so. I mean, those are the iconic moments that I remember of this era of college football.
Well, what's ironic about that, if you're an Ohio State fan, is the typical Ohio State fan was laughing that night at that game because of Michigan's unfortunate. But that game, that play knocked Ohio State out of the Big Ten championship, most likely a playoff spot.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't want to. We could talk about 2015 for forever. I sound like a salty fan, but Michigan State, I probably didn't deserve to win that Iowa game.
Oh yeah,
because not only because you have an 8-minute drive where Cook converts at least 1 or 2 fourth downs by just millimeters. There was also a play earlier in that game, and it never really got talked about. I don't ever remember hearing it on any post-game shows or coverage at all. There was a play in that game, and I don't remember who the Michigan State defender was, but it was a pass from CJ into the end zone. It would have been a touchdown to George Kittle. Kittle gets blown up, helmet-to-helmet contact, and I have issues with the modern day targeting rules as well. But if we're talking about the rule, it was clearly targeting. Helmet to helmet. The ball pops up. It lands on Kittle's back, and it's recovered by Michigan State. It's called an interception. Never was called targeting. Had that play, it would have been, I think it was 3rd down, but you call that targeting. Then you have like 1st and goal at the 2.
Sure.
Would have completely changed that game. I know it's all woulda, coulda, shoulda, but I remember that. And now, with that being said, the playoff game, and you can look up the highlights on that, but the playoff game, I don't want to know what would have happened because I saw what happened with Michigan State and Alabama that year. I mean, I don't think it could have been anywhere. I had somebody sparked this argument with me the other day, a good friend of mine, and maybe we get some comments here in the chat, Mark. But somebody asked me, would you rather, and I was surprised by his comment, but he asked me, would you rather go to the Rose Bowl, assuming the Rose Bowl is not part of the 4-team playoff. Would you rather go to the Rose Bowl and win or go to the playoff and lose? Or not even the Rose Bowl, whatever, New Year's Day, New Year's Six Bowl it is. Would you rather go to a New Year's Six Bowl and lose and win, or go to a playoff game and lose? And my first response was, I'd much rather go to the playoff and lose. And his response was, no, I'd much rather win a New Year's Six Bowl. So I'd be interested to know what Iowa fans say on this, because I thought it was obvious that you'd rather go to in that year, 2015, it didn't really matter because Iowa got destroyed by Christian McCaffrey and Stanford anyway. So you're going to get destroyed by Stanford, might as well get destroyed by Alabama in the playoff. But it is a valid argument to be had. I just have never dreamed of a scenario where you'd rather win a non-playoff game or non-playoff bowl game than actually make the playoff.
I understand his point. If you know the outcome, if you're just given the
right,
if you're just given the scenario of, do you want to go to the playoff and most likely get hammered, or go to this New Year's Six bowl game? Well, then I'm going to take the chance at the improbable upset win going to the playoff. But if you tell me we already know the results and you got lambasted in the playoff 38-0, as Michigan State did, versus you win a nice, Peach Bowl game against Florida and finish 13-1, and we'll rank you, sixth in the country, and you've got that feel good moment going into the off season. Yeah, I'll take that.
To me, it's the same conversation as asking, would you rather make the NCAA tournament and lose in the first round or win the NIT? Like, yeah. I that probably is more of a valid conversation, because winning the NIT is an accomplishment because it's multiple games. I would still probably rather make the NCAA tournament. I think maybe a better way to phrase that question is, would you rather make the playoff against a team you're fairly confident you can't beat, or would you rather go to a New Year's Six bowl against a team you're confident you can beat? Mm-hmm. So, that is an interesting conversation. Let's just hope we can have that conversation as Iowa fans this year, because long ways to go. I hate even bringing up the playoff. I used to be every year talking about Iowa's chances in the playoff. And then I got to a point where it's like, why am I even talking about this? It's like a 6-team rotational thing in the playoff nowadays. Hopefully that changes. I will say one thing. I am a big advocate, as I think any Iowa fan should be, for representation. The Big Ten needs to be represented in the playoffs. So I did not take joy in Ohio State losing to Oregon, because it doesn't do anything for Iowa. I mean, you lose to Oregon, it's a non-conference loss, and all it does is it hurts the Big Ten's chances at making a 14 playoff. So I know that's a discussion for a different day, but let's just hope that Iowa or someone can represent the Big Ten come January.
Absolutely. When you put metrics and numbers to the monopolization of the playoff by those three schools, I did it a few months ago, and it's rather staggering. One that comes to mind is that none of those three teams have lost to anybody outside of those three teams, except LSU beat Clemson. LSU beat Clemson in the championship game. There were a few, and just kind of combing through it, how many spots they've taken, how many games they've won versus the field. The field's basically won almost nothing. It looks like it may change this year, which I think is a good thing for college football.
And so, for those of us that don't know, including myself, who's just not been paying attention, the vote on the recommendation for the expanded playoff is taking place on what day? Is it sometime in September, correct?
It is sometime in September. I don't know that date. I certainly need to be aware of it, but yeah, it's coming.
But that is something that is Iowa related. That is something that Iowa fans, to me, should be rooting. I mean, extremely. I don't know who. I'm not for, and we had the opportunity to attend game days of media availability this past week in Ames, and we asked Reese Davis this question, and I've never heard Reese. Reese is a guy who's I like Reese Davis a lot. There were some people
I do too,
really knocking him on Saturday after the game day, and I like him, but he gave a really intricate and well thought out response to playoff expansion. So if anybody hasn't seen that, head over to my channel, From the Hawkeye to the Storm, and listen to what Reese Davis said about playoff expansion, because he hit the nail on the head. We should all be, in my opinion, be in favor of playoff expansion, but you just don't expand it willy-nilly. This idea of having, initially I was okay with the idea of expanding to where you have 4 teams with a bye, because to me, people who say, expanding the playoffs, it lessens the importance of the regular season. First of all, I disagree with that. But if you want to make that argument, then expand it to where you have 4 teams get byes, because then you're actually, even if you are safely in the playoff, you're also playing for positioning. But as Don Patterson has brought up, and Reese Davis brought up, it's a totally a flawed. And again, this is my opinion and their opinion. It's a flawed scenario because then you have the four best teams who are probably going to be three of those, those three teams you brought up already, Mark, that already have an advantage, but now we're going to have even more of an advantage because of injuries and fatigue and whatnot. So I loved Reese's response though, and I'm no playoff savant like you, but playoff expansion would do a lot of good for Iowa. And I brought up this to Reese in my question. Let's remember that Iowa and Iowa State would have both made the playoff already, had the playoff expanded earlier. And they both, Iowa State would have made it last year and Iowa would have made it in 2015. So no Iowa or Iowa State fan is going to fight that, I don't think.
Absolutely. I'm all for playoff expansion for a number of other reasons. I will give you my brief summary on why there should not be buys. And anybody that's watching has heard this a zillion times. And I'll also make a note because I've run these numbers, and that aside from the Luke Fickell coached 2011 Ohio State team between the Tressel and Urban Meyer eras, Ohio State would have made a 12-team playoff every year since 2004. Can you imagine? They would have made 17, except for one season, 17 consecutive playoffs. They'd have been in the playoff every year.
Yeah.
Well, I'm spitting out these ridiculous type statistics like that I find fascinating. Since that same 2004 season, do you know what Ohio State's worst record in the Big Ten is? Aside from the Luke Fickell interim coached season.
That was the year that came to my mind was the Luke Fickell year.
Yeah, I'm throwing that one out, the interim season, because it fits the narrative.
I have no idea what their worst record would have been. It can't be. What was it?
7-1.
Yeah,
they've never lost 2 games during that time frame.
And so let me segue to something that Reese brought up on Saturday.
Yep.
And maybe this goes along with your thought on expansion, but he brought up the fact that, and again, I don't know, is that the plan at this point is to, if you do expand to where you have whatever number of teams, that you have automatic bids from each conference? Because if you have automatic bids from each conference and they're based off of conference championships, then you could potentially have a Northwestern team who's 9-4 make it over an Ohio State team who's 11-1, but lost on the last second field goal to Northwestern. No, I don't know what that is. That the way that we're looking at expanding at this point, is having these automatic bids?
You know what? I hope so.
So why do you hope that? Give me your take on.
Because I think there's a reason that we construct divisions and conferences to determine champions, and those championships should mean something.
Okay.
And if you go through from year to year, yes, you are going to. I believe me, I get the numbers in my head, but I'm not going to take us through every year. It would take me forever to bring it to memory, plus to spit it out. Those scenarios are so infrequent. Infrequent.
Right.
Number one. Now, getting to the 12-team playoff proposal, I like everything about it. Like you, I make the argument that it brings more value to the regular season, because right now we're in a situation where in late November, let's say the last 2 to 3 weeks of the season, there are a handful of games that are meaningful toward the playoff. And that expands 3, 4, 5 times. Take a really good game in November with 2 or 3 weeks left. Let's say LSU and Auburn are playing and they're both 8-2. Well, that game's meaningless today. They've played their way out of the conference championship race. It's just a nice little game between number 10 and number 12. That game then becomes crucial under that scenario, and games like it all over the country among 1, 2, and 3 lost teams. And so I think it brings more value to the regular season, and the concern that there are going to be in the Alabama type scenario, and there's only a couple of them where they can blow a conference championship game and not care. because, hey, we're 12-0. Let's not give it our all. We're in the playoff. That's where you go on site for the first round games. And if a Clemson or Alabama want to not intentionally, but not take seriously a conference championship game, and if they want to show up in Iowa City or Madison or Seattle, Washington for a first round playoff game, go right ahead. Blow your conference championship game. Sure. That's why I like the value of the conference championship games, getting those 4 buys or giving value to the conference championship game. Here's why I don't like buys, Corey. Do you like the NFL?
I'm not as big of an NFL guy as I am college, but I follow the NFL pretty consistently.
So we've got buys in the NFL.
Yep.
And I'm not going to completely defend the buy system in the NFL, but it does make sense because when the Kansas City Chiefs finish with a record of 13-3 and earn a bye versus the Pittsburgh Steelers winning their division at 11-5, well, they have performed under a 16-game schedule against very light competition. Out of those 16 games, 11 of them are against exactly the same teams, and the other 5 or 6 are very like quality teams. So there's a reasonable measurement against like competition to determine that this team earned it over this team. What we would have in college football would be, of course, we're giving all the power to 13 people that go in a back room to determine the fate of these 12 teams. First, in the selection of the 12 teams, but the controversy almost shifts from who's going to get in, which is the controversy now, the team number 4 versus teams 5 and 6. That's the controversy we run into every year now. And it would shift to, well, if you're team number 13, you know what? You've got nothing to complain about. Your conference is represented. You were in 3rd place. You got nothing to complain about at that point. At least I don't think so. The controversy shifts to who gets the buys. And they're going to be the top 4 conference champions out of 5. Well, who determines that? Of course, it's going to be the selection committee. I would like to see an objective process, and I just don't think that's possible in college football because of the differences in schedule and trying to compare a 12-1 Iowa team that won the Big Ten versus a 12-1 Oregon team that won the Pac-12, and they didn't play anyone. They don't have a common opponent on the schedule. And so this is what the bye, I believe, does, Corey, is let's say it's Selection Sunday, day after the conference championship games, and we get the 12-team playoff decided, and then the committee also selects which 4 out of those 5 conference champions get the bye week. So the 4 seed will get the bye. They will play the winner of the 5-12 game in the second round. So let's say you're Iowa and you're the 5th ranked team in the country, and Oregon got the selection over you, and they're the 4 seed, and you're going to play a really good team from a Power 5 conference. Let's say you're going to play Florida. So Florida's the 12 seed, you're the 5 seed. Well, that first round game is probably going to be about 2 weeks away. And that second round game is going to be a week later.
Right.
So Iowa has to take Florida seriously. Obviously, that's not going to be an easy out. So both of those teams are going to be laser focused in their preparation for each other. Meanwhile, Oregon gets to sit for 3 weeks and prepare for both Florida and Iowa, split their time evenly and say, we're going to prepare for both these teams. Plus, we get to watch them play and prepare for them. And obviously, there's no chance that you're going to lose the game. That's the biggest advantage of receiving a bye, of course. Secondly, your team's not going to get banged up. They're not going to get nicked up. No impact players risk injury. You may lose 2 or 3 players in that game. If your luck's really bad, I think the chances are fairly high that you're going to lose somebody and probably get a few guys nicked up. And again, the preparation advantage, I just think, is monumental. I don't think it's fair, especially when that bye was given to a team and it wasn't earned.
Right. And that brings us back to the committee. I mean, that's and one thing that frustrates me, and I'm sure glad we don't have a preseason college football playoff poll, because that would be the end of the world if that happened, because then you're talking about, these future polls. I mean, when did the first poll come out? Is it week 6, Mark? The first college football playoff poll?
Yeah, something like that. In that range.
So you hope that there's not preconceived bias, but certainly there already is. You've talked about some of the faults of having this committee and the way their criteria that they're supposedly using. If we want to really select teams for the playoff, whether it's expanded or not, if we want to select teams for the playoff that are based off of who we believe to be the best team, then why are we playing games? Like, why? I don't understand. Why aren't we just putting Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and whoever's recruiting at a highest level? What's the point of even playing the games? I hate that. And, the idea of an eye test, I think there is something to be said. I don't know how I've heard your thoughts in the past about the BCS system. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know that there is a perfect solution, but the problem in my mind, with having a human committee is that we see what humans are doing with the AP, the voters, and even the coaches themselves. This is the coaches poll. You've got coaches themselves who are being influenced by, the coaches poll and the AP poll are not that far off, Mark. And yet we have a preseason coaches poll that's influencing every week from there on out. I don't get it. That the AP doesn't surprise me. The coaches poll does. And thankfully, again, we don't have a college football playoff preseason poll, but I don't know what the perfect solution is. I just know if you're an Iowa fan, you root for the expansion. And again, the argument against the buys from me and from, I know, Don Patterson, we've agreed on this, that we look at it more from, you look at it maybe more primarily from a preparation standpoint. We look at it more from injuries, because late in the year, that deep into a season, you're going to be dealing with injuries more than you have probably the entire calendar year. And let's not forget, too, that if we're talking about an Iowa or an Iowa State or a Wisconsin or a Northwestern, by the way, those are the teams that you're now become actual players year in and year out to make the playoff. Now it becomes an actual possibility. We don't have to just, go to sleep and dream we're in fairyland to actually believe that we're in the race for a playoff anymore. It becomes a reality. But the problem is, as you know, injuries are that much more devastating to an Iowa because you don't have the depth. You don't have, Spencer Petras doesn't have, 2 5-star quarterbacks behind him like Ohio State does. That's just not what you have. So one injury can kill you. So now you're putting those teams that are probably not going to be in the top 4 ever. You're giving the teams that already have more depth, you're giving them the bye, and you're saying, okay, we're going to put these developmental schools and these teams that don't have as much depth on the front lines. We'll see what you can bring to the table. And I think I do believe that for that reason, in addition to what you brought up with preparation time, that will destroy that will make things even more lopsided, in my opinion, for the top 3 to 4 teams in the playoff year in and year out. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe it will help. Obviously it'll drive more money in, right, for ESPN and whatnot, but it will not bring balance, in my opinion, at least not for those playoff teams.
So my last point on this is that we hosted a live stream during the off season, and this is my playoff formula. And I basically have 2 versions, because I understand the unreasonable component in a 16-team playoff in terms of trying to get in all the games and being reasonable to the athlete, which should, of course, be considered. But if we could go the 16-team route, I've built out that model, and then also the 8-team model as well. And so I, again, believe in objective playoff selection that's really not selection at all. Like the NFL doesn't, there's not a playoff selection. These standings dictate who makes the playoffs. So I would do the same thing. First of all, I think and I won't go through my system because it would take too long. Just, I would revamp in conference and out of conference scheduling to bring an equitable result to scheduling, first and foremost, especially to the non-conference. So again, people are looking for great matchups in the non-conference. I would be looking for equity. So people, as soon as I bring up, okay, I bring an equitable non-conference schedule and revise non-conference scheduling, suddenly they're thinking about, oh yeah, we'd have Alabama and Ohio State playing all the time. And no, we're not going to give unfair schedules just because you're good. No, it'd be equitable non-conference scheduling. The same thing again in conference, because there are egregious inequalities within conference scheduling. So that would be the basis of my playoff system to really have it work correctly. And then I would simply go with the 5-team. If we were going to keep the Power 5 in play and disband the group of 5, I've got a couple different models. But I would go with the conference champions, of course. You could, if you were going to go to 16 teams, I'm actually for all 10 conference championships or champions making the field and going even to the group of 5. And you've brought up the NCAA basketball tournament a number of times. This almost takes us to that place where we would have 5 Power 5 champions. We would have 6 wild cards from the Power 5. So I think we can be pretty certain that we'd have the 11 best teams in college football in this 16-team tournament. But the other ones would not be. Admittedly so, would not be. We might have the 20th best team out of the American Conference and the 50th out of the Sun Belt, but it's almost similar to the NCAA men's basketball tournament, where the conference champions of these lesser leagues are not necessarily one of the 68 best teams in the country. And I'm okay with that. But I would then select wild cards based on record from the Power 5. And then those records, of course, there would be ties all over the place. But then you would go to head-to-head, which wouldn't come into play too often, although an interesting scenario in 2018 that the Minnesota-Penn State game would have come into play as a head-to-head tiebreaker, sending Minnesota to the playoff, leaving out Penn State. And there was another one in the SEC with, I believe, Georgia and Florida, where the winner of the game would have made the playoff and the loser out. But then my tiebreaker system would then go to a strength of schedule, kind of a strength of record. To be more accurate, strength of record.
So, okay. So I guess I do have a question for you amongst all this. And I know hopefully we're not totally dulling the minds of Iowa fans who just want to focus on Kent State.
Yeah, I shouldn't have.
So, and maybe I missed this, but as far as the group of 5, what's the criteria here for,
okay,
for selecting of all the group of 5 schools? You have, a Boise State who's got 1 loss. You've got Central Florida is going to now be in the Big 12. You know where I'm going with this. What's the criteria here?
So 2 models. One is the 16-team playoff, where I would include all of the conference champions. So all 5 group of 5 conference champions would make the field. But if we're going to go with the 8-team playoff, then the best of the group of 5 would make it. The best record out of the group of 5. Again, we run into a situation with a possible tie between, let's say, 2 13-1 teams. And then we go to a strength of record component. Oh, we lost you. You suddenly, can you
Can you
still
hear me?
hear me?
Can you hear me?
There you are.
Okay. I don't know what happened there. I think you're going to have critics that if you allow, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but if you allow one team from every group of 5 conference in, then you're
Into a
look.
16-team field.
I know, but don't you think you're opening up a can where now you're saying, well, why are we devoting nearly a third of the playoff to teams that would? I mean, I fear that you're going to end up having a lot of blowouts in that opening round if you're going 16 teams and you're letting in the winner
Sure.
from the MAC, the winner from the you know where I'm going with this.
And we already do have the blowouts. So this is all I want, and I believe this is going to be solved. And this, unfortunately, kind of damages part of my channel in regards to having this debate, because I think this 12-team proposal that's going to be revealed is going to correct some of these things. I believe that the group of 5 is basically insulted every year in this process. We've not seen a group of 5 team make the playoff field, 28 spots over 7 years, even though we've had 3 undefeated group of 5 teams. They've never ranked higher than 8th in the final rankings prior to the playoff. So they've basically not been considered. Basically, we're insulting them or placating them by saying, we're going to include you in our rankings. You just can't make the playoff, regardless of what you do. So I am actually for formally including them or formally excluding them, one or the other. I'm good with either one. Either completely exclude them and say, go play your own playoff if you like, or we're going to give you a slice of the pie. And whether that's 1 automatic berth out of 8, or I know it's a bit of a radical system, 5 spots out of 16 to all the conference champions. I want there to be a formal decision.
So you're not, obviously you're not a fan, and I'm not saying I am, of a committee deciding all of this.
No.
Obviously. Because my first thought is, can you have a system where you do have a, and I know this is probably even more radical, but where you eliminate conference championship games in group of 5 conferences and you have a mini playoff within the Power 5 to decide an automatic qualifier. That might be a situation. That way you're not, again, I think you're going to get some people who are going to say it's not fair to include 5 different group of 5 schools. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but, don't expand the playoff to 16, but expand it to, even 8. I mean, if you expand it to 8 and you have the Power 5, you have your Power 5 schools play a conference championship game, which gives them an automatic berth. And then you have the group of 5 play, the top, the top, well, I guess you'd power the group of 5. I don't know how you would do that, but create a miniature play-in tournament, basically, for one of those 8 spots. And then have every other Power 5, have the Power 5 schools. You get 5 automatic bids. You've got the 6th with the group of 5, and then you got 2 at large.
I've implemented my system going back like 10 or 12 years and applied it to all of those seasons. And let's be honest.
Central Florida probably should have had a chance.
Yes.
I mean, absolutely. Boise State at some point should have had a chance at winning a national title. I'm trying to think of, I'm sure you could rattle off a bunch of group of 5 schools that should have had an opportunity in recent time. Trying to think, South Florida, did they have a year?
Well, yeah, here in 3 of the last 4 years, we would have had 2 undefeated UCF teams and 1 undefeated Cincinnati team.
Right. Yeah, and Cincinnati's, I think that opens up the whole debate that we had last Wednesday with Levi Stevenson. I think they are probably, but is the Big 12 clearly, are they clearly still a Power 5 conference that should operate within the same boundaries that the rest of the Power 5 operates in? Do they get an automatic bid when they're playing the likes of Houston and now Cincinnati's great right now, but are they going to be able to sustain that? What are your thoughts on? I know again we're really getting away from Iowa, but what are your thoughts on the Big 12 status moving forward?
I think basically those additions have made it a very deep and formidable conference of top 40 schools, top 40 football programs, but not that elite tier, of course, but not even the Penn State, Notre Dame tier, anything that those four do not add that level of play.
Well, let's be honest. Levi, he's a homer. It's great. But when he says that, oh, it's clear that the new Big 12 is better than the Pac-12, that's just ridiculous. I'm sorry. That's ridiculous. I didn't, I know I didn't call him out, but that's my opinion. Now, you gave some, the evidence that you brought up, and I think you brought up some of it to your fans, but I know you and Levi and I had a group chat briefly on Twitter where you presented some evidence that that indicated, at least to me, that those teams, UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, and BYU, have competed at a very high, consistently high level against the likes of the Pac-12. So, but to say that it's clearly better, that's fool's gold. That's and here's I keep going back to this. How many of those games? And I know we didn't. I don't know how much you ended up delving into this, Mark, but how many of those, if you look at the new Big 12, what is the new Big 12's record against the likes of Oregon, Ohio State? I don't know if you want to put Ohio State and Oregon on the same level, but right now the cream of the crop in the Pac-12 is probably Oregon, right? Even USC, and obviously the powers in, Oklahoma and Texas, and then, of course, the powers in the SEC. I think I still believe in you have to have somebody representing you. Is it fair to Iowa, Wisconsin, Penn State that you're in a conference where Ohio State, like it or not, they're just that consistently good and they recruit at a consistently high level where they're going to take that automatic bid every year, and yet you're giving an automatic bid to a Big 12 conference that has no top dog. So now we have a situation where, I mean, seriously, Iowa State could make the playoff once every 5 or 6 years under that system. Maybe I'm just a biased Iowa fan. I don't see that as fair at all.
Yeah, by adding those four to the Big 12, it makes for a very intriguing conference. So playing in a silo, it's interesting because Oklahoma State, TCU, Iowa State, the four that were added and more can all vie for a conference championship. So it makes for a very interesting conference. It's not top heavy at all. It's just a collection of top 40 programs where nobody's really outstanding and may not deserve or have earned a playoff spot versus what has to be achieved in other conferences. Okay,
real quickly, can we put up David Knight's comment? Because this is ridiculous.
Is it?
I'm going to get this comment up from David Knight, completely unrelated to football. All right. This is not, okay, hold on a second. This is Rob beautiful. Lowe. Yes. All right.
Uh-huh.
Isn't Rob Lowe like 50? I do not look like, I think Mark looks more like Rob Lowe.
Well, wait a minute.
Come on.
He could be thinking about Rob Lowe in his prime when he was at his most popular. That doesn't necessarily, that's not a knock against you.
No, I'm not saying it's
that's a compliment, I believe.
Rob Lowe? Seriously?
I believe that's a compliment. Again, not necessarily the 50-year-old Rob Lowe, the current Rob Lowe, but
well, did you see the other day, Mark? I don't know who it was. I don't know the YouTube user, but before the Seneca, it was after the Seneca Wallace interview. So we interviewed Iowa State former quarterback Seneca Wallace at Lowe's, which was funny that it was at Lowe's because we're talking about Rob Lowe. That's beside the fact. But after that, somebody commented and said, "Is that talking about me? Is that Mark's kid?"
Oh, I saw that. I saw that comment.
I said to my father-in-law, I'm like, Mark and I don't look alike at all. But it was a legitimate comment. He wasn't being snarky. Apparently I look like your son.
we don't look at all alike, but dark hair, white guys.
I guess.
I don't know
Yeah.
where else you can take that, but yeah, that's
Anyways,
that
I thought that was
shot me down immediately because that came hours after. At least seeing that comment came hours after, and this makes me cringe just a little bit, as you might imagine. I don't know if you have kids, but I was at church with my daughter, and a couple in front of us turned around after the service, and they were engaged in conversation with my daughter, and I was talking to somebody else, and then when they asked if I was her husband. So then that was, yes,
Oh,
cringeworthy, because of course the way I look at my daughter, she's my daughter, versus then turning around. At least there was some flattery there that I could be that young, but then turning around and then I could be your father.
no, and
So
I don't have children. I I think here's the thing. I think with me, I've had people say I look like Fred Savage. That's probably the
okay,
number one throughout
sure,
my whole life. I look
yeah,
like Fred Savage. I've never had anybody say I look like Rob Lowe. So everybody says my wife looks like Gal Gadot. I guess if you got Rob Lowe and Gal Gadot,
yeah. You should feel good
that's a
about
pretty
that.
hot couple right there, Mark.
Absolutely, feel good about that.
We've completely
Yes.
derailed from college football, so I apologize to all of our Hawkeye fans.
Hugh Jackman was my frequent
Yeah,
comparison
there we go.
at a later.
There's worse comparisons than Hugh Jackman
Yeah, well, I
and
used to have
Rob Lowe.
lot longer hair, and then the growth would turn into pretty large sideburns and the whole thing. So yeah.
It's great. That is great.
And the last thing we will let people know. Well, I don't know if this is the last thing. I'll give Corey the last word, but I did want to maybe strike up a little ire in the live chat, but we've been on here a long time about my ranking of Iowa as the number one team in the country, because I'm glad that you understand.
Oh, absolutely. I understand why you're absolutely right. I mean, again, I feel same way. I am one of those guys who my entire college football life, and I say that because I started watching college football probably later in life than most people who, I'll be honest, my parents didn't care about Iowa football. I mean, they really didn't. And so it was sort of a learned behavior for me. But I'm a kind of person who, as time has gone on, I've put less and less stock in the polls, especially this early in the season. I mean, there's no reason why anybody should put any stock in polls anyways. Even if, and no, this is no offense to your polls, Mark, but even if the AP voters and the coaches, if they did make these polls and set up these polls the correct way, which would be based off of body of work, resume, even if they did that, what's the point? What's the point in week 2 of doing it? There is no point. All it
Sure.
is for fans to be able to salivate
Yeah.
over. And so, uh, I'm the kind of person who acknowledges that. And I think there's probably a lot of fans that do this. You acknowledge that, but yet what's the first thing you do on whatever day it is? I know college basketball's Mondays and it's Sunday for the coaches poll. Is it Monday for AP? Is that when the AP poll comes
Yes.
out? The first thing you do at 1:00 Eastern that day is go to whatever app, whatever sports app you have, the ESPN app, Yahoo app, whatever it is, and check to see the polls. You want to see where your team's ranked. So it is to me, it is just, it's one of those things that is done because they know people are interested in it. And it is what it is. I mean, I'm the same way. It's like going to the state fair and you pay $8 for a corn dog that's, a 7-Eleven 99-cent corn dog. They know you're going to do it, even though you acknowledge it's a stupid decision, but you're going to do it. So, Iowa's number 5 in the AP poll. I think they're 7 in the coaches poll.
Yeah.
I don't really care to comment on whether I think that's deserved, because I don't think polls matter at this point. It's deserved. Clearly it's deserved, because of the resume. But if you let's look at this from the opposite end of things, Mark. If you were an AP voter and you are looking, again, throwing out the preconceived bias and what you see in the preseason polls influencing you moving forward. If you were just looking at body of work and projections, like if you had to actually, because that's unfortunately what these pollers do, is they look at what they believe these teams, where they actually believe these teams should be. That's why I've never understood how you can have multiple 1-1 teams ranked I mean, when you haven't beaten anybody. I don't know who's 1-1 in the polls right now. And I don't know, do you have any 1-1 teams ranked right now in your poll, Mark?
I do, but much lower than everyone else. Clemson's number 6 right now at 1-1, and Ohio State is number 9 at 1-1.
And so who has Clemson beat?
South Carolina State.
So that, to me, they're not ranked. Why are we ranking them? They haven't beaten anybody. Now, are they going to be a top 5 team? Probably, but we're not looking at projections. We're looking at rankings. Should be based off body of work. So,
absolutely.
If
almost any other team in the nation had beaten Western Carolina and had beaten Tulane, hanging on by a thumbnail, 40-35, they wouldn't be ranked. But Oklahoma started the season number 3 in the country. Therefore, they dropped all of one spot in the major polls because they slipped by Tulane, who, do we know? Again, I explain this to people all the time. There have to be some assumptions made. There has to be some evaluation that's based on our perception of these teams going into the season.
Yeah. So let's look at this from a perspective of you are a pollster or poller, whatever you call it, and you have to project Iowa. Okay, you're looking at body of work, and you're looking at what reality you're weighing the numbers. You know Iowa, where they rank in total offense and whatnot. If you had to put Iowa in a top 25 poll at that point, where would Iowa fall? Do you believe that they are? I know you don't believe that they're the best team in the country, like your current rankings say, but do you believe that they're a top 10 team right now?
Yes. I believe that Iowa is one of the 15 best teams in the country because I believed that before the season started. I had them ranked. I did a way too early top 25, and I ranked Iowa 12.
Okay. Yeah. I would probably agree with you at this point because the defense is that good. But yeah, I don't like it. To me, it doesn't do any good for anybody to be ranked at this point in the season, but it especially doesn't do good for a team that has some at least at this point, what appear to be gaping flaws, and that is the entire offense. So, it does. It makes me nervous, and it's a very good. This is what Iowa fans should be happy about, and maybe we can leave with this. Iowa fans should be very, very happy with how the schedule is shaping up because these 2 weeks, Iowa needs these 2 weeks. They need these 2 weeks to get Kyler Schott back in the rhythm of things. He'll probably be on a limited snap count this week. But if you get him back in the flow of things, conceivably he is ready for the Maryland game, full go, hope. And hopefully these next 2 weeks, you can use these to really fine-tune the offense. And if the defense can sustain that level, yeah, they are absolutely a top 10 team at that point. I don't know who's Wes Bentley.
I don't know. I was going to go scurrying to
let me grab a. I can grab you. Oh yeah, I can see it. I absolutely can see it here.
Oh, I'm not going to like this. Yeah. Okay.
Well, you need to grow your hair out a little bit more.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I'm not too happy with that.
Well, I'm not happy with Rob Lowe, but life does what it does.
I don't think that's bad. Again, placed into context of age, I think you should be happy with that.
I guess I should be. Fred Savage hasn't done anything for years. What has he done? I mean, Runaway Ralph. That's like the Princess Bride. Those are like the only Fred Savage movies I know.
The last time I saw Fred Savage was just a few days ago because they're revamping the Wonder Years, and he had some type of cameo or narrated something there.
Okay, maybe I did hear that. But he's kind of been irrelevant. So I'm setting my sights far above Fred Savage.
Okay.
Far above Fred Savage, Mark.
Well, for you to drop the name Fred Savage, and I believe most of us know who you're talking about, that he left his mark.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And The Princess Bride, by the way, Princess Bride is one of the best movies ever made. Would you agree with that, Mark?
I can't say that I've seen it.
Oh, wow.
I know what movie you're talking about. I'm not a movie guy.
I'm not really either, but you've got to watch The Princess Bride.
I'm a classic TV guy.
Now I will say this. I watch, and this is what every fan here, I mean, I want people to go to my channel from the Hawkeye Storm.
Yep.
And Iowa at the Voice of College Football and subscribe. But I will say right here, I am subscribed to, obviously, to your main channel, Mark. I've got notifications turned on. You are pumping out so much content. I don't know how you sleep. I don't know when you sleep. I don't know any of this stuff. So I understand that you don't have time to watch movies, but if I had to give you one project, go and watch The Princess Bride. It's a great movie. It'll make you feel great. And you get to see me at the beginning. You get to see me at the beginning. Fred Savage is in the movie. So,
I didn't know if we were going the Rob Lowe route or Fred Savage.
No.
Okay.
Fred Savage.
Okay.
Great movie. Rob Reiner.
I've heard that. This is our first edition of who knows how many of Iowa Hawkeyes Live. Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. You see it on the banner right there. Please head on over to his YouTube channel. And subscribe to the content there. And we've got our Iowa channel coming up this Saturday. What time is the Kent State game?
It's a 3:30 Eastern kick, 2:30 Central on BTN.
So at roughly 7 o'clock Eastern, 6 Central, something in that range.
Yeah, it'll be a
post game.
It'll be a little bit longer. The road games will jump on a little quicker because Don Patterson is able to be with us quicker. So it'll probably be maybe a quarter after 6 when we jump on. I'll be on for a few minutes before Don, and then of course Don will get home as fast as he can. He always tells me, and I appreciate this about him. He's told me that maybe some of our listeners who are on tonight know this story from Don, but the coaching staff thinks that Don should be able to just get whatever seats he wants and not have to pay. And Don says, no, I'm going to pay because I did not retire from Iowa. If he had retired from Iowa, he would have felt okay doing that, but he doesn't. So he gets regular seats. He pays for his season tickets every year. And he is the type of person that says, I'm not leaving any game till the clock hits 0, whether they're up 50-0 or whatever the case. So it'll be a consistent for Don. It'll probably be 45 minutes to an hour before he gets home, but I'll be on there. We'll be on there taking calls, taking chats, questions shortly after the game, but it'll probably be, 20 to 25 minutes after the conclusion of the Kent State game and every game for the rest of the season. Very good.
Join Corey and Coach Don Patterson after the Kent State Iowa game. And I will be here taking your calls as well throughout the day. Corey, we appreciate the time, of course.
Let's do it again, Mark.